Here's a really basic shelf project that you can make. Doesn't take much time. You can probably crank one out in about a weekend. This one here is a modern wall shelf. I've built this one before. There's a bunch of different variations that you can do. This is a very basic approach though. You can build it with dovetails. This one here is really just made with some rabbet cuts on a few of the pieces and some dowel plugs to glue it all together with some Gorilla wood glue. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through a step-by-step process on how you can build one of these. I'm going to show you a couple of different variations of it in terms of the size, and you can change it up the way you want. This is a really easy project. In fact, you can make the entire shelf from one single piece of wood. Depending on the width, of course, of the shelves, you may want to get a narrower piece and glue two of them together to make the wider shelf. This particular piece right here is South American mahogany. I really love mahogany. It's a great wood to work with. And in fact, for the price of this piece of wood, which was about $30, you're still going to end up spending a lot less at the end of the day than if you were to buy the shelf finished at a really nice high-end store. You can also make it out of poplar or maple or cherry or anything that really matches your personal tastes. This piece right here is going to be real easy to work with, real easy to sand at the end of the day, and come out really nice because it accepts a stain really, really well. The joinery on this project is really easy. It just involves a couple of rabbet cuts on the shorter pieces. Now, the rabbet cuts can be cut a number of different ways. You can cut them on a table saw with a dado blade. You can cut them with a straight cutting bit on either a router table or with a router and a fence. This particular application, I'm going to use my table saw and a regular blade and just a number of repetition cuts. So what we're going to do is we're going to mark these off and then we're going to head to the table saw. To measure your rabbet cuts, take the thickness of the board, these here are 3/4 of an inch, and take half of that as the depth. So half of that is going to be 3/8 of an inch. I'm going to mark on my marking gauge to a depth of 3/8 of an inch, lock it in, and then go to the end of one of the boards, the end grain, and just run your scribe all the way up. Now we're going to head to the table saw and we're going to set up the table saw to make the rabbet cuts, and then we'll go from there. With the scribe line you've marked, go to the table saw and set the depth of the blade right to the edge of the scribe line and lock it in. Then put the board on end and run your rip fence so that the outside edge of the saw kerf is even with the edge of the board. This will give you both the right depth and width of cut. So now with the rip fence in place, take a cross cut bar and begin to make a number of repeat cuts to produce the rabbet. So now that you have all the pieces cut, including the rabbets, the best thing to do now is really just do a dry fit and see how things look. This will give you a quick idea of how things are fitting together. And it'll also give you a better idea on whether or not you need to make any adjustments to your rabbets by cleaning them up. Everything looks pretty good here right now. And I think we'll be okay to begin drilling the holes for the dowel plugs. If you do happen to have any gaps or any extra pieces, you can do a couple of things real easily here. You can take a rabbet plane if you have one and just do a couple of quick light passes over it to clean that up. If you don't have one of these, you can use just a sanding block and some sandpaper to do exactly the same thing. Again, just a couple of quick passes to clean things up and make sure everything is fitting nice and snug. So if you were to put everything together here without sanding it, it may give you a little bit of a problem. You can always sand the entire board before you even cut it, or once you have the pieces cut, give them a couple of quick light passes with a 220 grit sandpaper. If you need to start a little rougher earlier on, that's fine. It's just easier to get this sanded nice and flat and smooth instead of contending with all the different angles and kind of butting up against the next board that goes next to it. That looks pretty good. We can move on to the other side and just do this on all the surfaces. And finish it up. Once you've had all the pieces sanded, next what you're going to do is mark the locations of the dowel plugs. For this particular piece, this is the 6-inch wide shelf. I think 3 plugs will look pretty good. So go onto the board, mark the middle of it, which is 3 inches, and then go a 1/2 inch in from each end to the other 2. Then you're going to take a marking gauge here and just go halfway in from the depth of the rabbet. So if it's 3/4 of an inch, again 3/8 of an inch, and make sure you've got a little cross mark to know where your other spot was. This is going to be the reference point for each of the holes. And you're going to want to do this on every single piece on each side, and then you'll be ready to drill the holes. Next, we're going to drill the holes in all the pieces here to accept these 3/8 inch dowel plugs. I just got some basic maple plugs here. They'll look pretty nice. You can find those again at your local hardware store. So clamp the board into position, and where you've got your 3 holes marked, hold it in place. Take a 3/8 inch drill bit. What I've done is I've marked a piece of tape here just about 1 inch down. It doesn't really matter how deep you go. You don't want to go too deep. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drill these holes just to the end of the tape, holding the board in place. Key here is to just take your time, don't rush it, and you'll end up getting some nice smooth holes, and everything else can get sanded out at the end. With all the holes drilled and the pieces cut, we're ready to move on to glue up. Now, instead of using the traditional polyurethane glue that foams, I like to use Gorilla's wood glue. This is a PVA Type 2 wood glue. Gives you about a 20-minute clamp time, and it doesn't foam. This makes it really easy to clean up with water, or you can scrape it off at the end with any excess. place here. They're obviously sticking over a little proud. Those can get pared off at the end along with the glue. We're going to clamp the piece up just to make sure everything is nice and tight. For this particular project, I only need really 2 clamps. I like to set it a little bit high over it. Place it in between dowels. And begin to snug everything up. Don't need to go too tight on this. This is something that's not going to get a lot of racking pressure on it. You can really just clamp it until it's just about finger tight on both ends. And just let it dry for about 20 minutes and we can move on to the next part. Once the glue is dry, it's easy to remove the dowel plugs. The excess is easily taken off with either a paring chisel or, my favorite, a little flush trim saw. You simply just begin gently pare it away, and then the excess, you'll have a little bit of glue residue and a little end of the dowel. You simply pare it off, the excess with the chisel, and sand the rest with some 220 sandpaper, and you'll be good to go. Once you've got everything sanded, it's on to the last step, always my favorite, applying the finish. You can see that even though these two are very different, they're from exactly the same board. I applied a darker stain with this one. I may go with a lighter wipe-on poly or an oil for this piece here. The last piece really is just determining how you want to hang these. You can hang them one way or the other depending on what your needs are, and that'll ultimately decide where you put your mounting hardware.